The blood on Alina Blackwood's hands had barely dried when Becky Waters swore she'd never love again. Standing in the dust of Tucson, Arizona Territory, 1883, she clutched the cold metal of her dead husband's wedding band, a solemn vow forming on her lips as the undertaker nailed shut the pine box containing John Waters' bullet-riddled body. "I reckon some folks aren't made for happiness," she whispered as the last nail struck home, sealing away the only man she'd ever loved. Becky had arrived in Tucson 3 years earlier, a bright-eyed 19-year-old with dreams of adventure in the Arizona Territory. She'd married John Waters, a local rancher with kind eyes and gentle hands, within 6 months of her arrival. Their love had been fierce and uncomplicated until Alina Blackwood arrived in town with her gambling husband. Nobody expected John Waters to die defending Alina's honor against her drunken, jealous spouse. Nobody expected 2 graves to be dug that day, John's and Mr. Blackwood's, who'd managed one last shot before the marshal's bullet found him. And certainly nobody expected the widow Blackwood to flee town the very next morning, leaving Becky alone with a modest ranch-crushing debt and a heart turned to stone. "Mrs. Waters," a deep voice broke through her thoughts. "My condolences." Becky didn't turn. She recognized the voice of Ross Newcomb, the tall cowboy who'd been working their land for the past year. He stood a respectful distance behind her, hat in hand, the wind tousling his sun-bleached hair. "Thank you, Mr. Newcomb. I'll expect you at the ranch tomorrow at the usual time." "We have cattle to move." Her voice was flat, emotionless. Ross shifted his weight. "Mrs. Waters, Becky, I know this ain't the time, but I feel I should say something. John was a good man, and he valued you above all else." "He wouldn't want," Becky spun around, her green eyes flashing with anger and grief. "Don't you dare tell me what my husband would want. He's dead because he couldn't mind his own business, because he had to play the hero for another man's wife." Ross flinched but stood his ground. "That ain't fair and you know it. John was trying to stop a beating. That's the kind of man he was." "Well, that kind of man is dead now," Becky's voice cracked, "and I have a ranch to save." As she turned to leave, Ross gently caught her arm. "You don't have to do it alone." The sincerity in his eyes made something within her crack, a hairline fracture in the wall she was building around her heart. She jerked away. "I'm done with men, Mr. Newcomb. All they bring is pain and empty promises. I buried the last man I'll ever love today." Her voice was ice. "I'll see you tomorrow at the ranch as my employee, nothing more." Ross watched her stride away, spine straight despite the weight of grief on her shoulders. He placed his hat back on his head and spoke quietly to the freshly dug grave. "I'll look after her, John. That's a promise." He looked toward Becky's retreating form and added, almost to himself, "I'll wait years if that's needed." Becky Waters' ranch sat 10 miles outside Tucson, a modest spread with good water and better grazing land. John had built the 2-story house himself, a testament to his ambition. Now, as Becky approached on horseback, the setting sun gilded the roof and made the windows blaze with golden light, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The banknote she'd found in John's desk drawer proved that. $3,000 due in 6 months, with the ranch as collateral. John had borrowed to expand their herd, betting on beef prices rising. Now she was left with the debt and half the cattle they needed to pay it. Morning came earlier than Becky wanted. She'd spent the night in the rocking chair on the porch, unable to face the empty bed upstairs. As the first threads of dawn unspooled across the eastern sky, she heard hoofbeats approaching. Ross Newcomb rode up the trail, leading 2 other men brothers who occasionally helped with the larger jobs on the ranch. "Mrs. Waters," Ross called, dismounting gracefully despite his tall frame. "We're ready to move the herd to the north pasture." Becky stood, smoothing her black mourning dress. "I'll change and join you." "No need," Ross said. "We can handle it. You should rest." The steel returned to Becky's spine. "This is my ranch, Mr. Newcomb. I'll decide what needs my attention." Ross's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Yes, madam." 15 minutes later, Becky emerged wearing John's old work clothes, her copper hair braided tightly against her neck. If the men thought anything of her attire, they kept it to themselves. The day passed in a blur of dust, bellowing cattle, and exhaustion. By sunset, Becky's hands were raw from rope burns and her muscles screamed in protest. But the herd was safely in the north pasture with its lush grass and reliable spring. As they unsaddled the horses at the barn, Ross approached her. "You worked well today, Mrs. Waters." "I've been helping John since we married. I know this ranch." "I don't doubt it," he hesitated. "About the money," Becky froze. "How do you know about that?" "John told me. He was worried about making the payment." Ross's eyes were kind. "I have some savings. It's not much, but no." The word cut through the air like a knife. "I don't need charity, Mr. Newcomb, especially not yours." "It's not charity, it's an investment. I believe in this ranch." Becky laughed bitterly. "An investment, and what would you want in return? A share of the ranch or perhaps something else?" The implication hung in the air between them. Ross's face darkened. "You insult both of us with that suggestion, Mrs. Waters. I respected your husband and I respect you. I'm offering help because that's what decent folks do." Becky felt shame heat her cheeks, but pride kept her voice cold. "I appreciate your concern, but I'll find my own solution. Good night, Mr. Newcomb." She walked away, feeling his eyes on her back until she reached the house. Once inside, she slid down against the door, finally allowing the tears to come. She cried for John, for the future they'd planned, for the child they'd hoped to have. And somewhere in that storm of grief, she cried for the way she'd spoken to Ross, who'd done nothing to deserve her bitterness. The next morning, Becky rode into Tucson. The banker, Mr. Holloway, received her with manufactured sympathy and real calculation in his eyes. "I'm terribly sorry about John, Mrs. Waters. A fine man." "Thank you," Becky said, sitting ramrod straight in the wooden chair across from his desk. "I've come about the loan." Holloway's sympathetic expression didn't waver. "Ah, yes, unfortunate timing with the payment due in October. I understand the terms haven't changed with John's passing." "That's correct. The bank requires full payment of the note principal plus interest by October 15th. Becky nodded. "I intend to honor that commitment, Mr. Holloway. I'll have your money." The banker steepled his fingers. "I admire your determination, Mrs. Waters, but ranching is difficult business for a lone woman. Perhaps selling would be the more prudent course." "I happen to know Mr. Harrison at the Diamond H is interested in expanding." Becky's hands tightened in her lap. Victor Harrison had been trying to buy their water rights for years. John had always refused. "I'm not selling." "Well, if you change your mind, I won't." She stood. "Good day, Mr. Holloway." As Becky left the bank, she nearly collided with a tall figure on the boardwalk. "Mrs. Waters," Ross Newcomb touched his hat. "Didn't expect to see you in town today." "Bank business," she said shortly, moving to step around him. "Wait," he said. "I want to apologize for yesterday. I overstepped," Becky sighed. "No, Mr. Newcomb, I should apologize. You've been nothing but helpful and I've been—" She trailed off, not finding the right words. "You've been grieving," he finished gently. "No apology needed for that." For the first time since John's death, Becky felt a small warmth in her chest. She quickly extinguished it. "Thank you for understanding. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have errands to finish." Ross's blue eyes studied her face. "Would you join me for coffee at the hotel restaurant, just as neighbors?" The invitation surprised her. She should refuse. She had sworn off men after all. But coffee wasn't courting, and truth be told, she was bone-tired of being alone with her thoughts. "Just coffee," she agreed. The hotel restaurant was quiet at mid-morning. They sat at a corner table, an awkward silence between them until the coffee arrived. "How long have you been in Arizona territory?" Becky asked, seeking neutral ground. "Going on 5 years now. Came west from Texas after the war. You fought." Ross nodded, something dark passing behind his eyes. "Confederate cavalry, not something I'm proud of anymore." Becky was surprised by his candor. Many former Confederates still defended the cause and after, drifted. Cowboyed all over Texas, then New Mexico, ended up here. He sipped his coffee. "John hired me when nobody else would. I was, in a bad way." "What do you mean?" Ross looked down at his cup. "I was drinking too much, fighting. John caught me sleeping it off in your barn one night. Instead of running me off, he offered me work and a bunk. Said all a man needed was a purpose." Becky felt her throat tighten. That sounded like John, always seeing the best in people, always offering second chances. "He was a good man," she said softly. "The best I've known," Ross agreed. They sat in companionable silence for a moment before Becky asked the question that had been nagging at her. "Why did you stay? After getting sober, I mean. A skilled cowhand could find work anywhere." Ross looked directly at her, his gaze unwavering. "I found something worth staying for." The simple declaration hung between them. Becky looked away first. "I should go," she said, rising quickly. "Thank you for the coffee, Mr. Newcomb." "Ross," he corrected. "After all this time, I think you could call me Ross." She nodded stiffly and left, his words echoing in her mind. Something worth staying for. She refused to consider what or who he might have meant. The weeks passed in a rhythm of hard work and harder decisions. Becky sold her mother's silver and John's pocket watch to pay the hands. She calculated and recalculated how many cattle they would need to sell to meet the bank note, always coming up short. Ross proved invaluable, working from dawn until dusk without complaint. He never again mentioned lending her money, but she often found him completing repairs around the ranch house or bringing extra supplies from town at his own expense. One evening in late August, Becky sat at the kitchen table surrounded by papers, trying to make numbers align in a way that would save the ranch. A knock at the door startled her. "Ross," she said, surprised to find him standing on her porch in the gathering dusk. "Is something wrong with the herd?" "No, madam, cattle are fine." He shifted uncomfortably. "May I come in? I have a proposition." Against her better judgment, Becky stepped aside to admit him. Ross removed his hat, revealing hair still damp from washing. "What kind of proposition?" she asked warily. Ross took a deep breath. "I heard in town that the Butterfield stage line is hiring guards for their gold shipments. The pay is good, real good, enough to help with that banknote." Becky frowned. "Stage guards are targets for every outlaw from here to California. I can handle myself. And the ranch. We're already short-handed. I'd only be gone 3 days a week. The Harmon boys can pick up the slack. I already spoke with them." Becky crossed her arms. "You arranged all this without consulting me." "I'm asking now," Ross said, a hint of frustration in his voice. "I'm trying to help Becky." It was the first time he'd used her given name since John's funeral. The sound of it in his deep voice sent an unwelcome shiver through her. "It's too dangerous," she said firmly. "More dangerous than losing the ranch," Ross countered. "You're working yourself to exhaustion, selling family heirlooms, and it still won't be enough. Let me do this." "Why?" Becky demanded. "Why risk your life for my ranch, for me?" Ross's expression softened. "You know why." The air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken words. Becky turned away, unable to face the emotion in his eyes. "The answer is no, Mr. Newcomb. I won't have your blood on my hands, too." Ross sighed heavily. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met, so I've been told." She opened the door, a clear dismissal. "Good night." After he left, Becky returned to her calculations with renewed determination. She would find another way. She had to. 2 days later, Victor Harrison rode up to the ranch house, his expensive Eastern suit out of place against the rugged landscape. Becky received him on the porch, refusing to invite him inside. "Mrs. Waters." Harrison removed his hat, revealing slicked-back silver hair. "You're looking well, despite your recent tragedy." "What do you want, Mr. Harrison?" Becky had no patience for pleasantries with this man. Harrison smiled, undeterred. "I'll be direct then. I want to buy your ranch. I'm prepared to offer $5,000, enough to pay your banknote and leave you a tidy sum besides." Becky's heart raced. $5,000 was more than fair, it was generous. With that money, she could start fresh somewhere else, perhaps even return east to her sister in Boston. "I'm not selling," she heard herself say. Harrison's smile tightened. Mrs. Waters, I understand your emotional attachment to this place, but be practical. A woman alone can't run a successful cattle operation. Watch me, Becky replied, steel in her voice. The bank note comes due in less than 6 weeks. When you fail to pay, I'll buy this land at auction for half what I'm offering now. He put his hat back on. Think about it, Mrs. Waters. Don't let pride cost you your future. After Harrison rode away, Becky sat heavily in the porch rocker. He was right about one thing: time was running out. That evening, Ross found her still on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains purple and gold. Harrison was here, she said without preamble. Ross leaned against the porch railing. What did he want? To buy the ranch. He offered $5,000. Something flickered across Ross's face, pain perhaps, or resignation. That's a good offer. I turned him down. Ross studied her. Why? Becky looked out at the land that had become her home. Because John loved this place. Because it's mine. Because Harrison only wants it for the water rights so he can squeeze out the smaller ranches downstream. Those are good reasons, Ross said quietly. Not good enough to pay the bank, Becky admitted. Ross straightened. I start with the stage line tomorrow, 3 runs a week, double pay for the danger. Becky stood abruptly. I told you no. You're not my boss for this job, Becky. I've already signed the contract. You had no right. I had every right to decide how I earn my living, Ross interrupted, uncharacteristically firm. Half my pay goes to you for the bank note. That's non-negotiable. Becky felt tears threatening. Why are you doing this? You could be killed. Ross stepped closer, close enough that she could smell leather and soap and something uniquely him. Because I made a promise to John to look after you. Because this ranch matters to you. Because you matter to me, even if you can't or won't see it. The naked honesty in his words stole Becky's breath. She stepped back, away from the dangerous warmth of his presence. I can't accept your money, she whispered. You can and you will, Ross said simply. Consider it an advance on my pay. When the ranch turns profitable again, you can pay me back with interest. Put that way, as a business arrangement, Becky found it harder to refuse. And if something happens to you, Ross smiled slightly, then you'll have one less mouth to feed around here. That's not funny, Becky said sharply. No, it's not, Ross agreed, serious again. But it's my choice, Becky. Let me help. Too exhausted to argue further, Becky nodded once, a curt acceptance. I leave at dawn, Ross said. I'll be back Thursday night. Be careful, Becky found herself saying. Ross touched his hat. Yes, madam. The following days crawled by. Becky threw herself into ranch work, rising before dawn and collapsing into bed well after dark. She refused to acknowledge the hollow feeling in her chest, the way she found herself watching the road for Ross's return. Thursday evening came and went with no sign of him. By midnight, Becky was pacing the porch, straining to hear hoofbeats in the distance. By dawn, she was saddling her horse to ride into Tucson. The stage office was crowded with travelers when she arrived. She pushed her way to the counter where a harried clerk was selling tickets. The Prescott stage, Becky demanded. It should have arrived yesterday. Where is it? The clerk looked up, irritated. Delayed, madam. Wheel trouble near Picacho. Should be in by noon. Relief made Becky's knees weak. Just a delay, nothing more. She was turning to leave when the door burst open and 2 men carried in a third between them. Blood stained the wounded man's shirt, his head lolling against his chest. Doc's coming. Someone shouted. Get him in the back room. Cold dread washed over Becky as she recognized Ross's tall form and sun-bleached hair. She pushed through the crowd, reaching him as they laid him on a table in the storage room. Ross, she gasped, taking in the bloody bandage wrapped around his torso. What happened? His eyes fluttered open, focusing on her face with effort. Becky, what are you doing here? What happened? She repeated, gripping his hand. Outlaws, one of the men who'd carried him in explained. Hit us near Picacho. Newcomb fought them off, saved the shipment, took a bullet for his trouble. The doctor arrived then, shooing everyone out except his assistant. Becky refused to leave, standing white-faced in the corner as the doctor cut away Ross's shirt, clean through the side, the doctor pronounced. Missed anything vital, but he's lost blood. He'll need rest. I'll take him home, Becky said automatically. The doctor raised an eyebrow. Home. To the ranch, Becky clarified, coloring slightly. He works for me. After the doctor finished cleaning and bandaging the wound, Ross insisted on riding back to the ranch, though Becky wanted to hire a wagon. I'm not an invalid, he growled, sitting carefully in the saddle. It's just a scratch that nearly killed you, Becky retorted, mounting her own horse. You're the most stubborn man I've ever met. Ross's pained smile made something twist in her chest. So I've been told. By the time they reached the ranch, Ross was swaying in the saddle, his face ashen. Becky helped him into the house and, after a moment's hesitation, up to her bedroom. She couldn't expect him to manage the stairs to the bunkhouse in his condition, she reasoned. I can take the sofa, Ross protested weakly as she helped him sit on the bed. Don't be ridiculous, Becky said briskly, hiding her concern behind practicality. You need proper rest. She helped him remove his boots and outer clothes, keeping her eyes averted from his bare chest and the bandage wrapped around his torso. When he was settled under the quilt, she brought him water and the laudanum the doctor had provided. Thank you, Ross murmured, already half asleep from exhaustion and pain. Becky stood in the doorway, watching the rise and fall of his chest, remembering the sickening fear she'd felt seeing him carried in bloody and unconscious. She'd told herself she was just concerned for an employee, a friend of John's. But the truth crashed through her carefully constructed defenses. She cared for Ross Newcomb, far more than she should. That realization sent her fleeing downstairs, where she spent a restless night on the sofa, trying and failing not to think of the man sleeping in her bed. Morning found Ross feverish, the wound showing signs of infection. Becky spent the day bathing his forehead with cool water, changing his bandages and forcing broth between his cracked lips. By evening, his fever broke, and he slept more peacefully. Becky sat beside the bed, watching the moonlight play across his features. In sleep, the hard lines of his face softened, revealing the vulnerability he kept hidden behind quiet strength. You shouldn't have done it, she whispered to his sleeping form. No amount of money is worth your life. Wasn't for the money, Ross mumbled, his eyes still closed. Becky started. You're awake. Barely. He opened his eyes, their blue startlingly vivid against his pallor. You were talking to me. I was talking to myself, Becky corrected, embarrassed. Ross's hand found hers on the quilt. I did it for you, Becky, to help save your ranch. I never asked you to put yourself in danger. You didn't have to ask. His fingers tightened around hers. I would do anything for you. Surely you know that by now. The naked emotion in his voice frightened her. She pulled her hand away and stood. You need rest. We can discuss this when you're recovered. Ross caught her wrist before she could retreat. I've respected your grief, Becky. I've kept my distance because I know you're not ready, but don't pretend you don't know how I feel. Becky couldn't meet his eyes. I'm not pretending anything. I told you at John's funeral, I'm done with men. All they bring is pain. Is that really what you believe? That John brought you pain? John left me. The words burst from her with unexpected force. He left me alone with a failing ranch and a mountain of debt because he had to play hero. Ross's expression softened with understanding. You're angry with him. Yes, no. Becky sank back into the chair, suddenly exhausted. I don't know, he didn't have to intervene. He could have let the marshal handle it. That wasn't John's way, you know that. I do, Becky admitted, tears welling, and I loved him for it. But now he's gone and I'm supposed to just continue, as if my heart isn't broken. Ross was quiet for a long moment. My father used to say that grief is just love with nowhere to go. A tear slipped down Becky's cheek. Your father was a wise man. He also said that the heart is like land, it can lie fallow for a season, but eventually it wants to grow something new. Becky stood abruptly. I should let you rest. Ross didn't try to stop her this time. I meant what I said at the funeral, Becky. I'll wait years if that's needed. She paused at the door. And if I never feel the way you want me to, then I'll still be here helping with the ranch, being your friend. His voice was steady, certain. That's enough for me." Becky closed the door without responding, her heart too full of conflicting emotions to form words. The next day, Ross insisted on moving back to the bunkhouse, though Becky argued he was still too weak. His stage guard pay arrived by courier twice what he made as a ranch hand. True to his word, he handed half of it to Becky. "First installment," he said simply. The money, combined with what she'd saved and the proceeds from selling some of their stock, put them within striking distance of the bank note payment. But they were still short by nearly $500. Ross recovered quickly, though Becky forbade him from returning to work for a full week. In his absence, she became acutely aware of how much he did around the ranch, fixing fences, maintaining equipment, supervising the hired hands. The place ran better with Ross than it ever had with John, a realization that brought both relief and guilt. September passed in a whirl of cattle drives, auctions, and belt tightening. Ross returned to the stage line, despite Becky's objections, bringing home 2 more payments. By early October, they were just $200 shy of the full amount. "We could sell more cattle," Ross suggested as they sat on the porch one evening, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. "If we go below 50 head, we won't have enough breeding stock to rebuild the herd," Becky countered. "We'd be buying ourselves a few months at most." Ross was quiet for a moment. "Harrison came by the south pasture today, raised his offer to 6,000. Becky's heart skipped. "You didn't tell him that we're short on the payment?" "No." Ross looked at her steadily. "But he knows, Becky. Everyone in town knows you're struggling. I won't sell to him, not even for 6,000. Ross nodded as if he'd expected no less. "I have another stage run tomorrow." "Double shipment, double pay, it should be enough." "No." Becky stood facing him. "Absolutely not. The double shipments are the ones that get hit. All the more reason they need experienced guards," Ross argued, rising to stand before her. "One more run, Becky, that's all we need." "We'll find another way. I'll talk to Mr. Holloway about an extension." "Holloway's in Harrison's pocket. You know that." Becky did know it. She also knew that Ross was right, one more stage run would give them the money they needed. But the thought of him riding out again, putting himself in the path of desperate men with guns, made her physically ill. "I can't lose you too," she whispered, the admission slipping out before she could stop it. Ross's eyes widened slightly. He took a step closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Becky," he said softly, one hand coming up to touch her cheek. "You won't lose me." The gentle press of his palm against her skin broke something loose inside her. Without thinking, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was brief, almost chaste, but it sent shockwaves through Becky's system. She pulled back, horrified at her impulsiveness. "I'm sorry," she stammered. "I shouldn't have." Ross's hand slid to the back of her neck, drawing her closer again. "Don't apologize," he murmured against her lips. "Not for this." This time, the kiss deepened, years of unspoken feelings pouring into the connection between them. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. "I swore I'd never love again," Becky said, her voice trembling. Ross pressed his forehead against hers. "I know, I'm afraid. I know that too." His hands framed her face. "But I'm not John, Becky. I can't promise I'll never leave you, no one can promise that, but I can promise I'll fight like hell to stay." Tears welled in Becky's eyes. "I haven't felt this way since John," Ross finished when she trailed off. "That's as it should be. John was your first love." "I don't want to replace him." "Then what do you want?" Becky asked, needing to hear him say it. Ross's smile was gentle. "I want to be your second love, your last love. I want to help you run this ranch and build something that would make John proud. I want to wake up beside you every morning for the rest of my life." The simple honesty of his declaration stole Becky's breath. For so long, she'd kept her heart locked away, convinced that loving again would somehow diminish what she'd shared with John. But standing here with Ross, she understood that her heart hadn't betrayed her first love, it had simply, miraculously found room for a second. "I need time," she said finally. "You have it. Ross assured her. All the time you need. Becky stepped back, creating space between them. But you're still determined to make that stage run tomorrow, aren't you? Ross's expression turned apologetic but resolute. We need the money, Becky. One more run, then I'm done with the stage line for good. Part of her wanted to argue, to forbid him from going, to confess that her feelings for him had grown too important to risk. But she recognized the same quiet determination she'd loved in John, the unwavering commitment to doing what was necessary, whatever the cost. Promise me you'll be careful, she said instead. Ross touched her cheek one last time. I promise. The next morning, Becky rode with Ross to town, neither of them mentioning the kisses they'd shared. At the stage office, she impulsively grabbed his hand before he could board the coach. Come back to me, she said fiercely. Ross's smile lit his entire face. Always. The 3 days Ross was gone were the longest of Becky's life. She kept busy with ranch work, but her thoughts constantly returned to him, to the feel of his lips on hers, to the fear that she'd never see him again, to the growing certainty that what she felt for him was love, different from but no less powerful than what she'd felt for John. On the evening of the 3rd day, Becky sat on the porch, straining to hear hoofbeats in the distance. When she finally saw a rider approaching, her heart leaped then plummeted as she recognized not Ross but the Butterfield stage manager. She stood, one hand clutching the porch railing. Mr. Phillips, what brings you out here? Phillips removed his hat, his expression grave. Mrs. Waters, I'm afraid I have news about Mr. Newcomb. The world tilted beneath Becky's feet. Is he? Alive, Phillips assured her quickly, but injured. The stage was ambushed near Dragoon Springs. 3 men, armed with rifles. They killed the driver before anyone could react. And Ross, Becky's voice was barely audible, shot in the shoulder, but he managed to drive off the bandits and get the stage to the station. Phillips shook his head in admiration. Never seen anything like it. He saved 6 passengers and the gold shipment. Relief made Becky's knees weak. Where is he now? Doctor's office in Tucson. He asked me to bring you this. Phillips handed her an envelope, said it was important. Inside the envelope, Becky found cash more than $200 and a brief note in Ross's angular handwriting. Enough for the banknote. Told you I'd come through. Don't worry, I'll be home soon. Becky clutched the money to her chest, tears streaming down her face. Can you take me to him? Phillips nodded. That's why I brought a wagon. The doctor's office was quiet when they arrived, the lamps turned low for the night. The doctor greeted Becky with a tired smile. Mrs. Waters, he's been asking for you. Stubborn man refused laudanum until he saw you were safe. That sounds like Ross, Becky said, managing a small smile. How bad is it? Clean shot through the shoulder, missed the bone. He'll have full use of the arm with time. The doctor led her to a small room at the back. He's weak from blood loss but otherwise stable. Try not to excite him. Ross lay on a narrow bed, his shoulder heavily bandaged, his face pale but his eyes alert. When he saw Becky in the doorway, his expression brightened. You came, he said, his voice rough with pain and fatigue. Becky rushed to his side, taking his uninjured hand in both of hers. Of course I came, you fool. What were you thinking, facing down 3 armed men? Wasn't thinking much at all, Ross admitted. Just reacted. His eyes searched her face. You got the money. Yes, Becky confirmed. It's enough for the banknote with some to spare. Relief washed over Ross's features. Good, that's good. It's not good, Becky said fiercely. Nothing about this is good. You could have been killed. Do you understand that? You could have died, and for what? Money, for you, Ross corrected gently. For your ranch, for our future. The word "our" hung in the air between them. Becky felt tears threatening again. I don't want a future if you're not in it, she whispered. Ross's eyes widened slightly. Becky, she leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his good shoulder. I thought I'd lost you. When Phillips rode up instead of you, I thought. I made a promise, Ross reminded her, his hand coming up to stroke her hair. I always keep my promises. Becky raised her head to look at him. Really look at him at the lines of pain and exhaustion etched into his face, at the quiet strength in his eyes, at the gentle curve of his mouth that had kissed her so tenderly. "I love you," she said, the words both terrifying and liberating. "I tried not to. I told myself I never would again, but I do." Joy transformed Ross's face, making him appear younger despite his injuries. "Say it again," he requested softly. "I love you, Ross Newcomb." This time the words came easier. "God help me, I do." Ross tugged her closer until their faces were inches apart. "I've loved you since the first moment I saw you, Becky Waters, even when I had no right to. Even when you couldn't love me back, and I'll love you until my dying breath." Their lips met in a kiss that sealed the promise between them, not just of love, but of partnership, of a shared future built on mutual respect and understanding. "Marry me," Ross murmured against her mouth. "Not tomorrow or next week when you're ready, but say you'll be my wife." Becky pulled back slightly, studying his earnest face. "Are you proposing to me from a sick, Mr. Newcomb? Not very romantic, is it?" Ross grimaced. "I had plans, a proper ring, a dinner in town." "I don't need romance," Becky assured him, stroking his cheek. "I just need you. Alive and whole." "Is that a yes?" Becky thought of John, of the love they'd shared, of the grief she'd carried. She thought of the vow she'd made at his grave, never to love again. And she realized that loving Ross didn't diminish what she'd had with John, it honored it. John had taught her how to love, Ross was teaching her how to love again. "Yes," she said, a smile blooming across her face. "But not until spring. I need time." "I told you I'd wait years if needed," Ross reminded her. "A few months is nothing." The following morning, Becky paid the bank note in full, watching with satisfaction as Mr. Holloway counted the money twice before reluctantly marking the debt satisfied. "Mr. Harrison will be disappointed," Holloway remarked, unable to hide his surprise. "Mr. Harrison will have to find another water source," Becky replied crisply. "The Waters Ranch isn't for sale. Not now, not ever." Ross recovered at the ranch house, where Becky insisted he stay to avoid aggravating his wound with trips up and down the bunkhouse stairs. The arrangement raised eyebrows among the ranch hands, but Becky found she cared less about gossip than about Ross's well-being. As winter settled over the Arizona territory, bringing cool nights and mild days, Becky and Ross fell into a comfortable rhythm. They shared meals and quiet evenings by the fire, discussing ranch business and future plans. When Ross was well enough, he began accompanying her on daily rides around the property, his presence beside her as natural as breathing. They were careful with physical affection, both aware of the impropriety of their living arrangement despite separate bedrooms. But sometimes, in quiet moments, Ross would take her hand or press a gentle kiss to her forehead, each touch a reminder of the promise between them. One evening in February, as they sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the desert in fiery hues, Ross cleared his throat nervously. "I've been thinking," he began, "about what you said, about needing time." Becky looked at him curiously. "I still do. Is that all right?" "Of course." Ross reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "But I wanted to make it official, properly this time, not from a sict." He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a small, perfect diamond. "It's beautiful," Becky breathed. "It was my mother's," Ross explained. "My father gave it to me before he died, said to save it for the right woman." He took her hand. "I've found her." Becky felt tears prick her eyes as Ross slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if meant for her all along. "April," she said suddenly. "We'll marry in April when the desert blooms." Ross's face lit with joy. "Are you sure? That's sooner than spring." "April is spring," Becky laughed. "And yes, I'm sure I've made you wait long enough." "I would have waited forever," Ross said seriously. "I know." Becky leaned forward to kiss him softly. "That's why I don't need to make you wait any longer." They were married on a perfect April morning, with wildflowers carpeting the desert floor and the scent of orange blossoms drifting on the breeze. The ceremony was small, just the ranch hands, a few townspeople who'd become friends, and the pastor from Tucson. Becky wore a simple white dress ordered from a catalog, with her copper hair crowned by a wreath of desert flowers. As they spoke their vows beneath an arbor Ross had built with his own hands, Becky felt John's presence not as a shadow over her happiness, but as a blessing. She knew he would approve of Ross, of the man who had waited so patiently, who had risked his life to save her ranch, who looked at her now with such devotion it took her breath away. "I, Ross Newcomb, take you, Rebecca Waters, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Ross said, his voice steady and sure. "I promise to love, honor, and cherish you in sickness and in health, in good times and bad, for as long as we both shall live." When Becky repeated the vows, replacing Waters with Newcomb, she felt a sense of rightness of coming home. As Ross kissed her, sealing their union, the assembled guests broke into cheers and applause. That night, as husband and wife, they discovered each other fully for the first time, their passion tempered by tenderness, their bodies joining as naturally as their lives had. Afterward, lying in each other's arms, they spoke of the future of children they hoped to have, of the ranch they would build together, of the life that stretched before them, full of promise. "Are you happy?" Ross asked, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. Becky raised herself on one elbow to look at him, at this man who had waited so patiently, who had proven his love not with words but with actions. "Happier than I ever thought I could be again. No regrets." His eyes searched hers, a hint of vulnerability in their blue depths. "None," Becky assured him, pressing a kiss to his lips. "You were right to wait for me. I needed time to understand that loving again doesn't dishonor what I had with John, it honors it." Ross pulled her closer. "I think John would be pleased, not just about us, but about the ranch." "You saved it, Becky, against all odds." "We saved it," she corrected. "Together." As the years passed, the Waters Newcomb Ranch flourished under their combined care. Ross's innovative ranching methods and Becky's shrewd business sense turned their modest spread into one of the most successful in the territory. They added land when they could, built a larger barn, improved the house, and eventually hired enough hands that neither of them had to work from dawn to dusk anymore. Their first child, a son they named John Ross Newcomb, arrived a year after their wedding, a strong, healthy boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's copper hair. A daughter, Sarah Elizabeth, followed 2 years later, and another son, William Thomas, 2 years after that. On the 10th anniversary of their marriage, Ross surprised Becky with a trip to San Francisco, a week away from the ranch and children, just the two of them. As they stood on the balcony of their hotel room watching ships glide into the harbor, Becky leaned back against Ross's chest, his arms wrapped securely around her waist. "Any regrets?" he asked. Echoing the question from their wedding night, Becky turned in his arms to face him. At 40, Ross was still handsome, with silver threading through his hair and laugh lines crinkling the corners of his eyes. She loved him more now than she had on their wedding day, their bond deepened by shared joys and sorrows, by the children they'd raised, by the life they'd built together. "Not one," she said truthfully. "Though sometimes I think about how close I came to missing this, if you hadn't been so patient, so willing to wait." "I meant what I said that day at John's funeral," Ross reminded her. "I would have waited years if needed." "Instead, you got shot twice and nearly died," Becky said dryly. Ross laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. "A small price to pay for this life with you." Becky raised herself on tiptoes to kiss him, marveling at how the spark between them had never dimmed. "I love you, Ross Newcomb." "Thank you for waiting for me." "I love you too, Becky Newcomb," he murmured against her lips. "Always have, always will." As the sun set over San Francisco Bay, casting golden light across their entwined figures, Becky thought of the journey that had brought them here, from grief to healing, from solitude to partnership, from a vow never to love again to a love that would last a lifetime. Some promises, she had learned, were meant to be broken, and others, like the one Ross had made to wait for her, were worth every moment of patience they required.